I still remember the first time I stumbled upon the name Satoshi Nakamoto. It was late 2008. The world was reeling from the financial crisis, and I was spending sleepless nights scrolling through obscure forums where cryptographers, libertarians, and digital dreamers debated the future of money. The banks had collapsed, governments were scrambling, and ordinary people were losing their homes. In that chaos, a single post appeared on a mailing list, a white paper titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. I didn't know it then, but that document would change my life. At first glance, it seemed technical, almost dry. Lines of code, references to cryptographic proofs, talk of blockchains and hash functions. But beneath the jargon, I sensed something radical. Here was a system that promised money without banks, trust without intermediaries, a ledger that no government could alter. It was as if someone had cracked open a door to a parallel world, one where power was decentralized and anonymity was not a flaw, but a feature. The author signed simply, Satoshi Nakamoto. No photo, no biography, no credentials. Just a name. I remember staring at it, wondering, was this a man, a woman, a group? Was it a pseudonym chosen to sound Japanese? Or was it genuinely foreign? The mystery was intoxicating. In those early days, the forums buzzed with speculation. Some thought Nakamoto was a seasoned cryptographer. Others imagined a rogue economist. Still others whispered about intelligence agencies planting seeds of disruption. I downloaded the white paper and read it line by line. The more I studied, the more I felt the presence of its author, not in flesh, but in thought. The writing was precise, almost austere, yet strangely poetic in its vision. What is needed, Nakamoto wrote, is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust. That sentence struck me like a revelation. Trust had always been the fragile glue of our financial system. We trusted banks not to gamble away our savings, governments not to inflate our currency, corporations not to manipulate markets. And yet in 2008, all that trust had evaporated. Nakamoto's proposal was not just technical, it was philosophical. It was rebellion disguised as mathematics. I began to follow the discussions more closely. A handful of programmers started experimenting with the code Nakamoto released. They mined the first blocks, tested transactions, and reported bugs. Nakamoto himself appeared occasionally, answering questions with calm authority, never revealing more than necessary. His posts were brief, polite, and always signed with that enigmatic name. I tried to imagine him, or her. Was Nakamoto sitting in a dim apartment, surrounded by servers humming in the dark? Was he a professor hiding behind anonymity, or a hacker with a taste for revolution? The more I speculated, the more the mystery deepened. One night, I decided to run the software myself. My laptop whirred, the fan spinning as the program began to solve cryptographic puzzles. I watched as numbers scrolled across the screen, meaningless yet mesmerizing. Hours later, I had mined my first fraction of a Bitcoin. It was worth nothing, just a string of digits in a digital wallet. But to me, it felt like treasure. Holding that coin, intangible, invisible, I felt connected to Nakamoto. Whoever he was, he had built a system that allowed me, a stranger across the world, to participate in something revolutionary. It was as if I had joined a secret society, bound not by rituals but by code. The forums grew livelier. Some dismissed Bitcoin as a toy, a curiosity that would fade. Others saw in it the seeds of a new economy. I found myself drawn deeper, not just to the technology, but to the enigma of its creator. Nakamoto never bragged, never sought fame. He spoke only when necessary, always with precision. And then he would vanish again, leaving us to speculate. I began keeping a notebook, scribbling down every clue. His writing style suggested someone fluent in English, perhaps British. He used phrases like bloody hard and flat out. Yet his chosen name pointed eastward toward Japan. Was it misdirection? A mask? The more I searched, the more I realized that Nakamoto was not just a person, but a ghost. He existed in fragments, emails, forum posts, lines of code. Each fragment hinted at a mind both brilliant and cautious. He never revealed personal details, never slipped into casual chatter. It was as if he had built walls around himself, ensuring that the mystery would endure. And yet, I felt his presence. When I read his words, I could almost hear his voice, calm, deliberate, slightly detached. He seemed less interested in glory than in the purity of the idea. Bitcoin was not about him. It was about the system. As months passed, the network grew. More miners joined. transactions multiplied, and the blockchain expanded block by block. I watched with fascination as this digital organism took shape, alive yet intangible. It was like witnessing the birth of a new species. But behind the excitement, I sensed tension. Governments were wary, banks dismissive, skeptics mocking. And through it all, Nakamoto remained silent, appearing only occasionally to guide the project. His restraint was maddening. Why hide? Why not claim credit for such a breakthrough? I began to suspect that anonymity was not just a choice, but a necessity. To invent a currency outside government control was to invite scrutiny, perhaps even danger. Nakamoto's invisibility was a shield. One evening, I found myself walking through the city, thinking about him. The streets were lined with shuttered shops, victims of the crisis. People hurried past, faces drawn with worry. And I thought, somewhere, hidden in the shadows, a stranger had given us an alternative. A system that did not rely on banks, did not bow to governments. A system that belonged to no one and everyone. I felt a strange mix of awe and unease. Was Bitcoin salvation or chaos? Was Nakamoto a visionary or a trickster? The questions haunted me. I returned home and opened my notebook. I wrote, "The origin is the mystery. Without Nakamoto, Bitcoin is just code. With Nakamoto is legend." That night, I dreamed of him. In my dream, he was faceless, a silhouette against a glowing screen. He typed with steady hands, releasing lines of code into the void. Behind him, the world burned with financial collapse, but he remained calm, building something new. When I tried to approach, he vanished, leaving only the word Bitcoin etched in light. When I awoke, I realized that the mystery was part of the allure. If Nakamoto had revealed himself, perhaps Bitcoin would have been dismissed as the eccentric project of a lone programmer. But by remaining hidden, he transformed into myth. He became the ghost in the machine, the invisible architect of a new order. And I, caught between fascination and obsession, knew that my journey had only begun. The deeper I ventured into the labyrinth of Bitcoin's early days, the more I realized that Satoshi Nakamoto was not just a name, but a puzzle deliberately designed to resist solution. Every clue I uncovered seemed to dissolve into smoke. Every theory contradicted itself. It was as if Nakamoto had built not only a currency, but a mask so perfect that even those closest to him could never glimpse the face beneath. I began to obsess over his writing style. I printed out every post, every email, every line of code he had released. I studied the cadence of his sentences, the choice of words, the subtle hints of culture embedded in his phrasing. Some insisted he was British, pointing to his use of bloody hard and flat out. Others argued he was American, citing his spelling conventions. Still others claimed he was Japanese, because of the name itself. But the more I read, the more I felt that these were deliberate misdirections, breadcrumbs scattered to lead us astray. I remember one particular night when I sat hunched over my desk, the glow of the monitor casting long shadows across the room. I had just reread an email Nakamoto sent to a developer in 2009. It was polite, concise, and utterly devoid of personal detail. No mention of family, no hint of location, no slip of personality. It was as if the words had been scrubbed clean of humanity, leaving only the sterile precision of thought. And yet, beneath that precision, I sensed something. A mind that was cautious, yes, but also deeply aware of the danger of exposure. To create Bitcoin was to challenge the foundations of global finance. To reveal oneself was to invite scrutiny, perhaps even persecution. Nakamoto's anonymity was not cowardice, it was survival. The forums became breeding grounds for speculation. Some whispered that Nakamoto was Hal Finney, the legendary cryptographer who received the first Bitcoin transaction. Others pointed to Nick Szabo, whose work on BitGold predated Bitcoin. Still others suspected a collective, a team of programmers working under a single pseudonym. I chased each theory like a detective chasing leads. I read Finney's writings, compared them to Nakamoto's. The similarities were striking, but not conclusive. I examined Szabo's essays, noting the parallels in vision. Again, close but not exact. Each candidate seemed plausible, yet none fit perfectly. It was as if Nakamoto had borrowed fragments of identity from many sources, weaving them into a composite mask. The paranoia grew. I began to imagine Nakamoto watching us, observing our futile attempts to unmask him. Perhaps he laughed at our theories, amused by our desperation. Or perhaps he feared us, worried that one day we might succeed. I started to notice strange coincidences. Posts would appear at odd hours, suggesting time zones across the globe. Code commits would align with patterns that hinted at multiple contributors. Was Nakamoto a single person or a collective intelligence? The uncertainty gnawed at me. One evening, I received a message from a fellow investigator. He claimed to have traced Nakamoto's IP address to a server in Finland. My heart raced as I opened the file he sent. It contained logs, timestamps, fragments of data. But as I examined them, I realized they proved nothing. IP addresses could be masked, rerouted, faked. The trail was a mirage. Another lead pointed to Australia, to a man named Craig Wright who boldly declared himself Nakamoto. But his evidence was flimsy, his motives suspect. He seemed more interested in fame than truth. I dismissed him as a pretender, a shadow, chasing another shadow. The more I searched, the more the mystery consumed me. I began to dream of Nakamoto not as a person, but as a phantom. In my dreams, he was faceless, a silhouette moving through digital corridors, leaving trails of code behind him. I chased him endlessly, but every time I reached out, he dissolved into static. I started to wonder if the mystery itself was the point. Perhaps Nakamoto wanted us to search, to speculate, to obsess. Perhaps his anonymity was not just protection, but a deliberate act of myth-making. By erasing himself, he ensured that Bitcoin would never be tied to a single identity. It would belong to everyone and no one. But obsession has a cost. I found myself withdrawing from friends, neglecting work, consumed by the hunt. My notebook filled with diagrams, timelines, linguistic analyses. I mapped out every clue, every theory, every contradiction. The pages became a labyrinth of ink, a mirror of my own descent into obsession. One night, as I stared at the tangled web of notes, I felt a chill. What if Nakamoto was not hiding from governments or banks, but from us? What if his greatest fear was not persecution, but discovery? To be unmasked would be to lose the myth, to reduce him to flesh and bone. Perhaps he had vanished precisely to preserve the legend. I began to see shadows everywhere. A cryptographer's blog post seemed suspicious. A programmer's email contained echoes of Nakamoto's style. A forum user's silence felt deliberate. I chased each shadow, only to find emptiness. And yet, the mystery persisted. Nakamoto was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost haunting the digital age. His absence was his presence. His silence was his voice. As the months passed, I realized that the search for Nakamoto was not just about identity. It was about meaning. To know who he was would be to anchor Bitcoin in history, to tie it to a human story. But to leave him unknown was to elevate Bitcoin into myth, a creation beyond the reach of biography. I closed my notebook and sat in silence. The shadows swirled around me, whispering theories, taunting me with half-truths. I felt both defeated and exhilarated. The mystery was unsolvable, and perhaps that was the point. In the end, I wrote a single line on the last page of my notebook. The shadow is the substance. Without the mystery, there is no Nakamoto. Without Nakamoto, there is no myth. And as I set down my pen, I realized that the hunt had changed me. I was no longer searching for a man. I was searching for an idea, a ghost, a legend. And legends, by their nature, cannot be caught. While I look back now, it feels almost surreal how quickly Bitcoin grew from a whisper in obscure forums to a roar that echoed across the globe. In those early days, it was little more than an experiment, a curiosity mined by hobbyists on clunky laptops. But within a few short years, it became something far larger, a movement, a rebellion, a force that governments could neither ignore nor control. I remember the first time I saw Bitcoin mentioned in mainstream media. It was 2011, and a small article appeared describing it as digital money for geeks. I laughed at the dismissive tone, but deep down I felt a thrill. The secret was leaking out. What had once been confined to cryptography mailing lists was now stepping into the light. The forums buzzed with excitement. Transactions were happening, real exchanges were forming, and people were beginning to assign value to these strange strings of code. At first, a Bitcoin was worth pennies, then dollars, then tens of dollars. I watched the numbers climb. My own modest stash suddenly transformed from novelty into something tangible. But with growth came shadows. The anonymity that made Bitcoin revolutionary also made it dangerous. Criminals began to take notice. The infamous Silk Road Marketplace emerged, a hidden bazaar where drugs, weapons, and forbidden goods were traded, all paid for in Bitcoin. I remember logging onto the site, not to buy, but to see. The interface was simple, almost banal, yet the implications were staggering. Here was a marketplace beyond the reach of law, powered by Nakamoto's creation. I felt both awe and dread. Bitcoin was no longer just an idea, it was a weapon. Governments reacted with alarm. Headlines screamed of digital drug money. Politicians demanded regulation, and law enforcement scrambled to understand this new beast. Yet for every attempt to control it, Bitcoin slipped through their fingers. It was decentralized, borderless, immune to censorship. I began to sense that Nakamoto's silence was strategic. By vanishing, he had ensured that no one could be held accountable. Bitcoin had no leader, no headquarters, no face. It was a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more would grow. The scandals multiplied. In 2014, Mt. Gox, the largest Bitcoin exchange, collapsed after losing hundreds of thousands of coins. I remember the panic, the forums flooded with despair, the price plummeting. People called Bitcoin a failure, a scam, a bubble destined to burst. And yet, it survived. More than survived, it thrived. New exchanges rose, new investors joined, and the price recovered. It was as if Bitcoin had absorbed the blow and grown stronger. I watched with fascination as the narrative shifted. What had once been dismissed as a toy was now being studied by banks, debated by economists, and feared by governments. Bitcoin was no longer a fringe experiment. It was a global phenomenon. But with growth came obsession. I found myself checking the price daily, watching the charts rise and fall like a heartbeat. Each spike brought euphoria, each crash despair. It was addictive, intoxicating, a roller coaster of hope and fear. I began to see Bitcoin not just as a currency, but as a mirror of human nature. Greed, fear, ambition, rebellion, all reflected in its volatile price. It was not just code, it was psychology, sociology, philosophy. And through it all, Nakamoto remained absent. His silence became louder with each passing year. Some claimed he had died, others that he had been silenced, still others that he was watching from the shadows. I imagined him observing the chaos, his creation spiraling beyond his control. Did he feel pride or regret? Did he intend for Bitcoin to become a tool of liberation, or had he foreseen its descent into speculation and crime? The questions haunted me. The rise of Bitcoin was not just financial, it was cultural. I saw it in art, in music, in literature. It became a symbol of resistance, of freedom, of defiance. Protesters carried signs demanding Bitcoin, not banks. Hackers wore its logo like a badge of honor. And yet, beneath the idealism, the greed grew. Investors flocked. Fortunes were made and lost. Bubbles inflated and burst. Bitcoin became both dream and nightmare, salvation and ruin. I remember attending a Bitcoin conference in 2015. The room was filled with enthusiasts, developers, entrepreneurs. The air buzzed with energy, with ambition, with the sense that we were witnessing history. And yet, I felt a strange emptiness. Amid the excitement, Nakamoto's absence loomed like a ghost. His name was whispered, his legend invoked, but he was not there. It struck me then that Bitcoin had transcended its creator. It no longer needed Nakamoto. It was alive, autonomous, unstoppable. But the mystery persisted. Every time the price soared, every time a scandal erupted, every time a government tried to intervene, the question returned. Who was Nakamoto? I found myself imagining scenarios. Perhaps he was watching from a quiet home, smiling at the chaos. Perhaps he had vanished into obscurity, living a normal life while his creation reshaped the world. Or perhaps he was gone, his identity buried forever. The rise of Bitcoin was a paradox. It was both liberation and danger, both hope and fear. It empowered the powerless, yet enriched the greedy. It defied governments, yet attracted criminals. It was a mirror of humanity, reflecting our contradictions. And I, caught in its orbit, felt both exhilarated and trapped. The more I studied, the more I invested, the more I obsessed, the deeper I sank into its world. Bitcoin was no longer just a currency, it was a labyrinth, and I was lost within it. One night, as I watched the price surge past $1,000, I felt a chill. This was no longer a game. Bitcoin had become a force, a storm sweeping across the globe. And at its center, hidden in the shadows, was Nakamoto, silent, invisible, untouchable. I closed my eyes and imagined him again, the faceless figure at the keyboard, releasing code into the void. His creation had grown beyond him, beyond us, beyond control. It was alive and would not be stopped. Here is part 4, The Myth and Legacy, written in English in the first person, around 1,300 words. This final section closes the 5,000-word narrative, reflecting on Bitcoin's modern impact, the imagined presence of Nakamoto, and the tension between myth and reality. Years have passed since I first mined that fraction of a coin on my old laptop, since I scribbled Nakamoto's name in my notebook like a talisman. Bitcoin has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. It has survived crashes, scandals, bans, and betrayals. It has risen to heights that defy reason, fallen to depths that test faith, and risen again. It is no longer just a currency. It is a phenomenon, a myth, a mirror of our age. And yet, the shadow of Nakamoto lingers. I watch the headlines now with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Governments debate regulation. Banks scramble to adapt. Investors ride the waves of volatility. Bitcoin is everywhere. In boardrooms, in protests, in art galleries, in the whispered conversations of those who dream of freedom. It has become a symbol, a banner carried by rebels and entrepreneurs alike. But amid the noise, Nakamoto remains silent. His absence is louder than any voice. He is invoked like a prophet, quoted like scripture, imagined like a ghost. And I, still haunted by the mystery, find myself wondering, was this his plan all along? I imagine him sometimes watching from the shadows. Perhaps he sits in a quiet home, sipping tea, reading the news of his creation's triumphs and scandals. Perhaps he smiles at the chaos, or perhaps he feels regret. Did he intend for Bitcoin to become a tool of liberation? Or did he foresee its descent into speculation and greed? The truth is unknowable, and perhaps that is the point. The myth of Nakamoto has become inseparable from Bitcoin itself. His anonymity is not a flaw, but a feature, a narrative that elevates the currency beyond the reach of biography. If he were unmasked, if his identity were revealed, perhaps the legend would collapse into mere history. But by remaining hidden, he has ensured that Bitcoin is not tied to a man, but to an idea. I think of other myths, other legends. Prometheus stealing fire, Hermes inventing language, anonymous monks preserving knowledge in dark ages. Nakamoto belongs to that lineage, a figure who gave us something transformative and then vanished, leaving only the gift and the mystery. And yet, I cannot let go of the obsession. I still search, still speculate, still dream. I imagine encounters that will never happen. One night, I dreamed again of him. In the dream, I walked through a city lit by neon, screens flashing Bitcoin prices, headlines, debates. At the end of a dark alley, a figure waited. He was faceless, cloaked in shadow, but I knew it was Nakamoto. "Why did you disappear?" I asked. He did not answer. Instead, he handed me a coin, not digital but physical, heavy in my palm. On its surface was engraved a single word: trust. When I looked up, he was gone. I awoke with a start, the dream lingering like smoke. I realized then that the mystery was not meant to be solved. Nakamoto's silence was his final message. By erasing himself, he forced us to confront the idea, not the man. Bitcoin is not about who created it. It is about what it means. And what does it mean? To some, it is liberation, money beyond borders, beyond banks, beyond governments. To others, it is danger, a tool for criminals, a bubble waiting to burst, a threat to stability. To me, it is both. It is contradiction embodied, a mirror reflecting our hopes and fears. I think of the crises that birthed it, the collapse of trust, the failure of institutions, the hunger for alternatives. Bitcoin was born in rebellion, in desperation, in vision. It carries that DNA still. And I think of the future. Will Bitcoin endure, or will it fade? Will it become the foundation of a new economy, or the relic of a failed experiment? No one knows. That uncertainty is part of its essence. But one thing is certain: Nakamoto's myth will endure. His name will be whispered, his white paper studied, his code revered. He will remain the ghost in the machine, the faceless architect of a new order. And I, still scribbling notes, still chasing shadows, still haunted by his absence, know that I will never stop searching. Not for the man, but for the meaning. Sometimes I walk through the city and see Bitcoin logos on shop windows, hear conversations about wallets and exchanges, watch the price tick upward on screens. And I think this is Nakamoto's legacy. Not fame, not wealth, not recognition, but impact. He changed the world, and he did so without ever revealing himself. That anonymity is his genius. By vanishing, he ensured that Bitcoin would belong to everyone. No leader to corrupt, no founder to betray, no face to idolize. Just code, just community, just myth. I close my notebook now, the pages filled with years of obsession. I know I will never solve the mystery, but perhaps that is not failure. Perhaps the mystery itself is the gift. Nakamoto is gone, but his shadow remains. Bitcoin lives, breathes, evolves. And I, caught between awe and unease, continue to walk the labyrinth he built. At the end of the path, there is no face, no name, no revelation. There is only the idea, pure, defiant, eternal. And that perhaps is enough. Subscribe for more.